All right, this is a cool section. This is one of my favorite subjects. In this one, we're going to be talking about animations in Unity. Now, we can do 2D and 3D animations inside of Unity, and they're both handled in a very, very different manner. So let's talk about what animations look like. Animations are nothing more than controlling some values on a timeline. So, for example, we might be controlling a position over time, an X, Y, and a Z over time. This is an animation for a bat that at 0 seconds starts out at some value here, and at 30 seconds is at some other location here, and at about 70 seconds is at this location. So these are just values that define what to do with its position over time. Most numeric values in Unity you can animate. These are all clip-based. We are looking at an animation clip. An animation clip is typically a .anim file that you create inside of Unity, or you are brought in from another tool. So if an animator creates something in Autodesk Maya and you import it, then Unity can read its animation data as well, and that's typically inside of an FBX file. Now, each clip, as mentioned here, affects a single game object or its children. So you're not going to have one animation that's controlling 20 different game objects in your scene. These animation clips are per game object or that game object's children. And a clip just changes a game object properties, the components. You are animating your game object's property values or the components that your game object has. That's what an animation is. If you happen to be animating a 2D image, you are just changing the sprite on the sprite renderer component. If you are animating a 3D model, you are just moving its different pieces by 3 different positions and rotations. And most numeric game object properties can be controlled. So, for example, the position and rotation and scale are numeric objects on a game object. You can animate them over time. You can scale an object out to pulse and grow and shrink and grow. Really, really easy to do. There are 2 animation systems in Unity. The legacy one uses the animation component. This is a component on the game object called animation. This is the older one, where you would see these animation clips, these little play icons, right in line here. Like everything was described in this one component, and you really had to use a lot of code to go between your animations and successfully synchronize their states together, and how you knew when you were in one and getting out of the other. That's the older system. The newer system uses the animator component. And this is the animation system that you'll hear called of Mechanim. And this uses, again, the animator component. It's a little confusing when you start out, but think of the animation as the older legacy way. They both work off of clips. But the animator component, rather than listing those clips right in line, rather than listing those animation files, points to this animation controller. It's like this flowchart type thing. You can't really tell the icon here if you look at here, but it's kind of this little flowchart. That's because you tell the order of which animations to play and when. So, for example, this zombie, when it starts up, is going to rise out of the ground, go idle, and then when you tell it to, it will go to attack and come back to idle, or it will go to walk and then come back to idle, or attack to walk back to idle. So these are the combinations of animations. This defines the flow of animations. So you don't have to write the code to say, okay, I'm idle, now I'm going to attack. Am I done attacking yet? Wait, go back to idle. You can basically say you trigger a variable that will make it attack and go back again. And we'll look at this in a second here. Since our workshop is going to be 2D animation based, and 2D animation is pretty considerably different than 3D animation, even though they use some of the core same concepts, you're just animating pieces of a game object. We're going to talk specifically on dealing with 2D animations here. So let's go ahead and look at our project here. We're going to look at the Vamp Kid versus Zombie Apocalypse. Now, bringing things in Unity scene, we saw that I can just drag prefabs in. You might be wondering, like, where does all of this, all of these artwork pieces come from? Artwork, you can take and just drag and drop in a 2D project. This is one of the settings when you create a 2D project versus a 3D project. It makes it so you can just drag and drop artwork in your scene, lay your scene out, and away you go. So that's really what I've done already in the scene. We've dragged and dropped and created a scene for us. But what we want to do is I want to show you a zombie and what might make up an animation. Now, let's go ahead and choose idle. These are the pieces of art that an artist gave me. Let's move this up a little bit. You can see as I loop through them on the right-hand side here, these are the idle frames. This is what makes up an idle animation. If I select all these frames, I can just drag and drop them into Unity here. Drag and drop. And Unity says, ah, I see you have a bunch of still frames you've just given me. What do you want to call this animation clip? And I'm going to call this idle. It's going to be in my idle folder. I like consistency. So save that, and you'll see the little clip created here and my animation controller. This is my entire zombie right here on the right, my game object. There's my game object properties. A sprite render is what makes it visible. A sprite renderer points to these images. And what the sprite renderer will do is, let's look at this animation controller. So far, we only have one animation. So it starts up and plays idle. That's the only animation we have so far. Now, if we look at what's in this idle, we have to open our window, animation window, right here. And when we click on, it is context sensitive. So if we click on an object that doesn't have animations, it asks us if we want to create them. Well, I'm going to click on my zombie because it just created my animation for me. What is that animation? All that animation is it says we are changing the sprite property. In fact, you can see when I click on the timeline here and kind of scrub along it, these are called keyframes. We can see it tells me what property it's animating. All it's doing, let me advance through it using these right here, these keys. Next. All it does is it points to each different idle animation along my timeline. Pretty simple, right? So I start with idle 1, and there I go, along my timeline. Now let me click play and preview it. That's all it's doing. On my timeline, at different points in time, it's changing a game object property. And Unity has done that all. It's set it up for me. And I can see if I go to my animator component, let's go ahead and play this. We'll see this live, that this is the one being played here. Let me go back to my scene. Okay, I'm running my game now. If I go to my animator component here, notice it's showing me that it's just playing that over and over and over again. That's the animation file right there. That's it. It's pretty simple. Let's create a couple more because we're going to need to control these through some code. That's my animation for idle. Let's go ahead and do an attack. And attack, let's drag and drop them onto zombie. We're going to call this attack. And notice it didn't create a new character in my scene for me. It just created my attack animation. Let's go ahead and do next. Let's do, we did idle. Let's do walk. Select walk. Control A, select all of them, drag and drop onto zombie 1. We're going to call this attack. Oops, I'm sorry, not attack. We want walk. Drop onto my zombie, and this is called walk. Let's make sure I go into my walk folder here. Okay, save my changes, Control S. Now if we look at my animator component here, I think, did I just drop? I did. I made a slight boo-boo, which I can correct easy. I actually dropped my, my other animations onto one of my other characters here. That is okay. So it created attack here for me. Yeah, so that's okay. I can just literally take my attack animation here, I wasn't paying attention, and drag it in here, and there's my attack. But what I haven't done is define any way to get through them. So let's go like this. We're going to create transitions. I'm going to right-click on idle and make a transition to walk. make a transition from walk back to idle. So from idle, I can start walking, and then I can go idle again. From idle, I'm going to make a transition to attack, and I'm going to go back again. All right, great. I have transitions. How do I know when these transitions get actually triggered? Well, that's how we create parameters to do that. So I'm going to create a Boolean value called walk. That's a Boolean value this animation system is going to use. Nothing is using it yet. If I click on my arrow, I say only. You should only go to walk when, see over here, conditions. Let's add, and automatically defaults to the only variable I have. When walk is true, as soon as that variable becomes true, which we'll set in code very easily, as soon as walk becomes true, we'll start playing walk. And as soon as walk becomes false, we'll go back. So these arrows is where we define the variables. In code, we're going to set walk equal to true. And as soon as it sees that happen, it will play this transition, and we're going to be going over here. A transition is just essentially a 2D transition means halfway through playing the animation, we're going to jump on over and play the walk animation. It doesn't blend the two animations together. It wouldn't know how to do that from 2D. 3D, you can actually morph animations together, running to jumping to somersaulting. It will actually blend them all and morph them together. 2D, it's simple. It just starts playing idle, and then at some point in time, just switches right over to the walk animation. Okay, now we're going to add a different type, which is a little bit more confusing, called a trigger. Think of this as a Boolean that you don't have to worry about setting true or false. You basically say, hey, I want you to attack right now. And when attack is set, let's select attack here. Notice there's going to be no true or false. It says, all right, when you set attack, we're going to immediately play this. And as soon as we're done playing our attack animation, we're going to go right back to idle. It's a great way to do a one-time operation. With our walk value, we have to track when we're true, when we're false, so we know when to go here, when to go back. We have to maintain the state of our walk variable. For something like a punch or an attack, we just want to say, hey, do it right now. And it's going to play it. And as soon as you're done, it goes back. And that's where a trigger comes into play. It's kind of like a one-frame Boolean that it will automatically set back to false for us. Okay, now we can play this, and let's debug this here. Let's click play. Go back over here to our scene. We can debug these. We know that when walk is true, we'll start walking. There we go. And again, we're going to set these in code, but we can test them out here. Walk is false. Go back to idle. And we can see the transitions happen. Watch the arrows. There we go. Now if I attack, I click it once. See that? It just plays attack. And go right back again. Okay, now, the next trick is we have to control those variables in code. And it's not really a trick. It's really easy. I have a code file here called animation demo. The two things you need to do is, one, just like we did in physics, you get the animator component. That asks Unity to give you a reference to this guy right here, this component. And this is how you control the animations in code. All these parameters, you need a reference to the animator component to be able to work with them. And then it's literally one line of code. Set Boolean, walk is true. When you want to go idle, set Boolean, walk is false. And when you attack, set trigger, attack. Now, how are we going to trigger these off? We would have other code when this happens. So for example, when the zombie starts up, we could play walk. In this case, let's create some buttons on the screen. We're going to cover this in the UI section a little bit, but it's a good idea to get started with some now. Let's go to our scene view. I'm going to say, create me a UI button. And that button, I want you to dock in the top left. So I'm going to hold down Shift and Alt, just like it says on the screen. Shift, Alt, click on top left. Let's double click on that button. Now, I'll explain this view when we get to UI. So cart before the horse a little bit here. Let's go ahead and rename this to, call this idle. And we'll call this idle And then we're going to duplicate this button, drag it down, and duplicate this one more time and drag this down. Actually, I'll call this idle, the button itself, idle. And then we had an attack. And then the last one we called walk. And let's make our buttons say the respective things by just changing the text on them to be attack and on walk. And don't worry about what I'm doing to set the actual button text here. We'll talk about that in the UI module. All right, now what are we going to do in each of these? Let's take that code, which was our animation demo, this basic code, and let's drag that onto our zombie idle 04. Just really an awful name, so let's just rename that to zombie. We'll just call him zombie. Now this would be a good time to create a prefab from this guy if we wanted to reuse him by just dragging and dropping to our prefabs folder. So this zombie has this code on it, but nothing is calling that code. The cool thing you can do with buttons is you can say, all right, here's my idle button. And when you click on the button, this is for folks that have done Visual Studio development for WPF or WinForms or even Web Forms development. This is just like hooking up a button handler. You say, when you click on this object, I want you to look at my zombie. I'm going to drag and drop my zombie over here. Notice you can drag and drop these references. What do I want you to call? Well, that zombie has code on him called animation demo, and I want you to play idle. Nice way to hook up a button to a code event. It has to be a public void method. So attack, we can do the same thing. We can say, add a click handler, drag the zombie over, and call animation demo play attack. And lastly, our walk, we click on add to add a new handler, drag our zombie over there, and then we're going to play walk. Let's see how this works. Click on play. Those buttons should be on the top left of our screen here. There we go. Now, we have a little bit of a problem here because our camera doesn't allow us to see that particular zombie. So let's go ahead and move our zombie up into our scene rather than just hanging out down here like he is. Now you'll notice, the zombie is hidden behind everything. Why is that? That's because of sorting layers. We have 2D sorting layers, just like you would in like Photoshop, for example. And this guy's on the default layer. We'll cover this in the workshop, but let's go ahead and move him to a layer above it. And let's do this on the level layer, which is above the background. Just like a sorting layer in any 2D tool. Okay, let's run this. We should see our, there we go. Let's go, he's idle, let's go ahead and walk. He's walking. Now we don't have any code that's moving him, so he's just strutting in place. Go back to idle. Let's attack. Attack.